All right, Josh Smith here, live at my Flat 5 studios. My guest today is a great friend and a huge influence on not just my playing, but also my outlook on this whole business of guitar. Not even, and what's funny is it's changed, not just in today's world where I'm doing these videos. It was initially the playing and the sessions, and he was always there with kind words, advice. Some guys are never the guys who just freely give you good advice. They're always trying to keep their spot. Tim was never that way. He's always been so kind to me, and I truly consider him a true friend. He's a legend who's played. It'd be easier to list the people he hasn't played with than the people he has, so I won't even go down the list. But it's really, honestly, a pleasure to have you here. And the fact that I can call you up with a question or borrow an inset for a chair from you blows my mind sometimes, when I look through my phone and I see your name there. So everybody, please welcome Tim Pierce.
Thanks, Josh. I was telling somebody the story the other day about how we met each other, and you gave me back the backrest that I had loaned you for your chair, and I borrowed a music stand from you. It's like, can I please have a cup of sugar, Josh?
Yeah.
It was, and they were actually blown away by, wow, you guys really are kind of, in the neighborhood together, and.
Yeah, in fairness, we do live pretty close to each other.
Yeah.
It's funny,
Pretty
like
awesome.
James Santiago from Universal Audio, who actually I have to do something for right after we're done with this. I could walk to his house. So it's like, dude, could I borrow a power supply or this or that? It's always, yeah. It's nice to have guys.
It is.
So, Tim, I start all of these by asking everybody a little bit about their family history and how the guitar ended up in their hands. I know you're from Albuquerque, and I wonder, my family was not musical. My parents don't play. I really don't have any musicians in my family other than my uncle, but he was living out here. So in Florida, I didn't have anybody. And I'm wondering, was your family musical? How did the guitar end up in your hands the first time?
You and I are so much alike then, and that's the first I've heard of that, and it's very interesting to me that you would say that because it was the same for me. My mom and dad were not musical, but what was amazing is Albuquerque, New Mexico, that desert, and particularly the AM radio, were absolutely magical. I was born in 1958, and by 1963, and when I was well, let's say 1961 even, when I was 3 years old, I was becoming obsessed with songs I heard on the radio. And I remember the song Downtown by Petula Clark being the
Sure.
most magical thing I'd ever heard. Puff the Magic Dragon by Peter, Paul, and Mary. And that was before the real game was on, when the Beatles showed up and Otis Redding and B.B. King and
Yeah.
Glenn Campbell. And I mean, the AM radio was like full on, diverse, every style, every great artist. I fell in love with Top 40 on the AM radio, and it literally transported me into a world of. I see. So I lived in this desert, and it was beautiful, and then my family was kind of a nightmare, and you know how that is. You sometimes when you survive a bit of a nightmare, you depend on something. You fall in love with something, and I tried falling in love with sports,
Right.
but I was too small for that. I mean, Terrence Trent D'Arby once said to me, it's the little guys who become musicians because they can't play sports, and there is some truth to that. I never forgot when he said that. So I was that guy. I wanted to be a basketball player too, but I didn't have the size for it. So it didn't come from my parents and my family, and it's very interesting to know that that's your situation too. It came from songs I heard on the radio, and I could not have been born at a more perfect time.
Yeah, true. I mean, you had the about to be the birth of, Beatles and all of that stuff. What did your parents like to listen to? What kind of music were they into?
I don't know that they listened that much. They liked the same. Well, let's just speculate that they liked the radio as much as I did because it was on all the time, and I had two sisters, and they were listening to the radio all the time. So that's a really good point. That they actually, I never gave them credit for that. They opened that world to me. I mean, they liked it too. We didn't really have a. I don't think we had a stereo in the house until I started getting really obsessed around 1968, 1969. Then I remember my dad bought a huge stereo. I have to thank him for that too. God, you're bringing back all this stuff, and that was amazing too. But because in the late '60s, that's when it was really on. Hendrix
Yeah.
was my hero, just like everybody else. And then Clapton, and Johnny Winter, B.B. King, Billy Gibbons. So I would say my parents liked the radio also.
Interesting. So how'd the guitar end up? Did you beg your parents for it? How'd you get the first one?
It's probably a similar story for all of us. I thought that I would be a drummer because I was obsessed with the sparkle finish on drums. I don't know if you remember that, but and that came from me loving drag racing. I loved funny cars, and funny
Wow.
cars had like 35 layers of gold flake, red candy apple red paint on them. So I would go to this drag strip and look at these amazing cars. And so when I saw a drum set that had those kind of finishes, I wanted to play drums. And I thought, well, this will be easy too, probably. Or like many kids, you gravitate toward the drums first because it's physical. You feel like
Oh
I
yeah.
can do this. But that I remember taking drum lessons, and it didn't feel that great. So the next thing that happened, I started drawing guitars. I would sit there in grade school and I would draw guitars, while the teacher was trying to get me to listen and stuff like that. My sister had a classical guitar. This is it. God, you're bringing it all back. My sister had she had a gut string, and I started picking that up and going, "Oh, this feels. I want to learn it. I want to learn some chords. I want to learn this." So, at age 12, I got guitar lessons. My mom bought me a harmony guitar and a harmony amplifier. Two terrible instruments, but it did not matter. And I had an Electro Harmonix LPB1 power booster that I would shove
Yeah.
into the input of the harmony amp and just explode it. And then it kind of sounded like Led Zeppelin or something.
Wow.
But then what happened? Oh my mom said, okay, I'll match your lawn mowing money. I bought what now is a vintage Stratocaster for $300.
Yeah.
Because I knew the harmony was not a great guitar. So really, by the age of 13, my mom helped me buy. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? A vintage Stratocaster.
Wow. But I mean, it sounds like your parents were so supportive. They got you drum lessons, even though that didn't work. They got you a guitar, an amp, guitar lessons, so they were into it.
They were into it as long as they figured this is a cool thing, but it's not serious. And so I have to give them credit for that. And I remember exactly. I started playing guitar at age 12 with a ferocious obsession. And that's a little late because, Steve Lukather started at 6. I wish I had started at 6. When did you start? What year? Well, I mean, how
At
old were you?
6. I started
Yeah,
at
see
6.
that it's better if you start at 6. So I started at 12, and I was obsessed immediately and full on every afternoon. Come home from school, play guitar all afternoon into the evening, dinner time. Probably more guitar after that. So it took exactly 7 years for them to realize, oh, we've lost him. But they fought me for exactly 7 years.
Yeah.
And by the time I was 19, they finally went, we give up.
Well, I'm
He's a
always
guitar
curious
player.
about that too with people's parents, especially once you get into high school, because so many of us have similar stories where you start young and you get obsessed, you progress very quickly. Maybe you make friends in the neighborhood who play and start a band, or maybe even you start playing with older cats like I did because you progress quick and you find a way to get out and gig. Then the parents start to realize, uh-oh, like, yeah, this is for real. Like, this could be his whole life. And my parents were always really cool with it. My grandparents were much more scared about it. They expected college and all the typical things. How did your parents feel when you got to that spot? Were they worried?
Well, I did the same as you. At age 14, I joined a band with 17, 18-year-olds. And I would go to parties, and because everybody was like, I was looking up at all these, adults, and I would, I remember like finding a dog and petting the dog at a party because it was like I felt so out of whack. And then I played in bars when it was not legal to play in bars. That whole story that we all do, I was like 17 playing in bars when you had to be 21 to be there. But here's what happened. Once at 19, my parents decided, okay, he's going to be a guitar player. He's not interested in college because I did a semester of college, but I just wasn't interested. I wanted to play guitar. I was obsessed. Still, it was all I wanted to do. So what happened was they actually helped me, and they probably had different intentions. My mom really wanted me to be whoever I wanted to be, and my dad wanted to get me the hell out of the house.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
my mom gave me $2,000, or they did, and my mom gave me her used car, and they gave me $2,000, and I remember driving away with a U-Haul trailer. I just left for L.A. Like, here we go. I remember
What
my
was this?
dad
20 years
standing there.
old
He
or
was
so?
so happy to see me drive away. And it's good because he wanted me to be on my own. Any dad would want their son to be self-sufficient, and that was it. It was like, okay, if you're going to do this, you're going to do it, and we'll help you. We'll give you this push,
Yeah.
but
So
you're out of here.
So you took, I mean, pretty much immediately after high school with, one semester of college and, gigging under your belt as a teenager, you immediately took the LA leap. Did you even talk to anybody about what that would entail, moving to LA and, what it was going to be like, what to expect, or was it completely blind?
Well, it got more and more frustrating just to be a guy playing in bars in Albuquerque. So you take something that's feeling worse and worse all the time and you go, what's the alternative? I don't care what happens out there. All I cared about it, if I could move to LA and actually just make a living playing anywhere, on doing anything on guitar, that's all that's all I cared about. And I did know a roadie for a band, The Babies, and that was John Waite's band, Jonathan Cain, who joined Journey, and he was from Albuquerque. And I also had an actor friend who had moved out. So I drew it out in Albuquerque as long as I could. I didn't move to LA till a month before I turned 21.
Okay.
So there was a couple of years of just trying to make peace with playing in bars in Albuquerque, me going, I want more than this, I want more. I always dreamed of California because since I was a little kid, all the TV shows were in California. That was easy, that idea. So it was a leap of faith, and I remember when I first got to LA, I was sick to my stomach every morning because it was so big and so intimidating. And I only knew this one guy, but he hooked me up with a musician who needed somebody to take a gig that he was leaving. Now you understand this, right? He was actually exiting this band that was playing out, and in order
Hmm.
for him to do it gracefully, he had to slot somebody in
Sure.
to cover that gig so he could move. He didn't want to burn any bridges. And that was my first gig. It was a band called Shandy. That band got a record deal, and I was doing my first record very quickly after that. And I remember I would do pickup gigs. I would go into the recycler, and for $30, I'd do a rehearsal for somebody. There were showcases all the time. You would do showcases to try and get record deals if you were an artist. So $30 rehearsals, $50 gigs, demos. I actually reached a point where I could keep $700 in my bank account. My bank account, I
Wow.
started with 2,000, it went to 700. I was able to keep it at $700 and start buying gear and keep paying my rent. And I knew I was okay. It was amazing.
Well, that is amazing. I mean, considering, I know the feeling, and obviously I'm 20 years later, but when I get here, I'm 22 years old, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And I'd already spent, 10 years being a professional, but only playing blues and my own music. And, never played for anybody else, never done a session for anybody else, never even been in a studio for anybody other than to record my music. So it was like I literally came here having no idea what to do and how I was going to do it. So to be able to have that happen and sustain yourself, would you call your parents like I did it?
Well, my dad was a tough one, but my mom was. They were super happy that I actually was self-sufficient. Super
Mm.
happy, but the best moment. I'm just going to jump ahead, then we can jump back. The best moment for my parents was I got this gig with Rick Springfield when he was a star, two
Right.
years later, and they came up to Red Rocks in Colorado. I don't know if you've ever played there, but it's spectacular.
Yeah.
And we did a gig there, and there's an underground tunnel out to the soundboard. And so they were sitting right out there by the soundboard, and in the middle of Rick's set, he does a kind of an acoustic thing. And I went through the tunnel during the middle of the show and sat with them, and there was, sold out, huge stage, and I was taking a break in the middle of the actual concert to go out and sit with them. That's really when it was like, it was awesome for all of us.
That is awesome. Yeah. Okay, so you're playing with bands here in town. Do you remember, you said you did some demo sessions and stuff. Do you remember the first session like at Capitol or Sunset Sound or something like that? Ocean Way?
Well, this band that I did, it's this band I did called Shandy. They were produced by Mike Chapman, and Mike Chapman and Nicky Chin were the biggest producers in LA at that point. It was the beginning of new wave. I mean, he produced The Knack, My Sharona, all this crazy stuff. So they had a new label, and we went into what was then United Western, and the back room that everybody goes to. Now it's East West. The room in the very back where the Chili Peppers recorded and everybody. And at that time, it was so crazy. We recorded right back there. You would walk out the door, and that door in that skinny parking lot. Mm-hmm. Well, there was a building across from that alley that was SIR. And in that building, and through another open door, was Van Halen rehearsing.
Oh, wow.
So I would literally, this was 1982, I would walk out the door into the alley, look across at another open door in the adjacent building, and just listen to Eddie Van Halen rehearsing for their tour right before their second record. It was insane. It was insane. Yeah. It was like so inspiring.
Yeah, that's some only LA stuff.
It truly is.
Yeah, can that happen? Yeah. Yeah, did you know when you were doing that, did you have an inkling that, you'd prefer to be doing studio stuff, or did it come just over time as you did more and maybe enjoyed it? And also, after the Rick Springfield and touring and stuff, was it partially the burnout from that?
It was an exact feeling that happened later. What happened was I took the Rick Springfield touring gig when I was 23, and I had I didn't have studio skills that were good enough, frankly, to sustain a studio career. I did okay. I was doing records, and when I had help and when I was in a band, I could actually do the job. But the job of being in the studio, you got to be able to do anything and everything immediately in any situation. I didn't quite have that. So when I joined Rick's gig, it was like, this is a major tour. I'm doing this. This is what I've always dreamed of. We're gonna go tour. So in all the way through like 1983 to 1987, I did 4 world tours with Rick, and it was kind of perfect for me because I was not really ready to be a studio musician full time. I was gaining those skills, and it also was a big enough tour to where I could kind of get the whole landscape of the music business. But I realized a couple of things. And the main thing is this: if you take a tour, the other guy gets the session because you're not there. It's that simple. And I began to really feel that, because it's like when you disappear on the road forever and you want to be a studio musician. Now that equation has changed because it's not quite as crucial anymore. This is then. But if you wanted to be a studio musician, you had to be there for every phone call. Mm-hmm. And I remember Jeff Porcaro actually became a friend of mine. We would do a lot of sessions together. This was later in the early 90s. And Jeff actually was going to produce his first record. It was Boss Skaggs. And he called me to play guitar on it. And I couldn't because I was on the road with Al Jarreau. That was the late 80s or early 90s. And that was the moment when I realized, I really have to, if I want to be a studio musician, I have to not say yes to any more tours. Now, that backfired on me once because I got offered a Joe Cocker tour after doing a record with him. And I said no, and they upped my fee. And I said no again, and they offered me even more. And I said no again. That summer, I had no work whatsoever. And it was the worst feeling. But maybe during that summer, I did a couple of demos that led to records. See, that's the thing. And you know this. When you do a session or any kind of gig with anybody, you can make a connection with somebody in the band or on the stage or watching you that will lead to the greatest thing you'll ever do. So every session you do, great or small, important or unimportant,
Yeah.
is important in the sense that it can lead to amazing things.
Absolutely. I'm curious, do you remember in the, initial stages of, while you're on tour with these different artists and doing sessions when you're not on tour, when you said you didn't have the studio chops yet, do you remember sessions with guys like Porcaro or, guys who were vets already at that time and like basically kind of taking notes on like, okay, this is, yeah, or sessions with other guitar players even where there was two guys and seeing like what you needed to check off the skills you needed to acquire? Because I remember that big time.
Oh, don't I know it? I mean, early on, I sat next to Steve Lukather on a Japanese pop session where he was able to display his skills in that situation, and it's so humbling. And you realize, you're going, and he's over there being Larry Carlton. It's like yeah, that is a kind of school that I'm so grateful for, because when you see, here's the deal, and musicians always are guilty of this. In New Mexico, I would listen to a Steve Lukather part because I was aware of everybody on every record,
Sure.
and go, I could do that. And then you show up and you realize he did that off the top of his head in one take.
Yeah, yeah.
And
you can do it because you heard him do it. He did it out of thin air. Yeah.
Exactly. Well put.
Yeah.
And that lesson, I'm so glad I learned it early, and I'm so glad I had a decade in LA. The thing about LA back then is it was actually a nurturing place.
Interesting.
It's hard for me to even say this because I thought it was really intimidating and competitive, but really it was pretty nurturing. You could work your way in at all different levels and be kind of, I learned on the job.
Yeah.
Here's the deal. I was obsessed with soloing, and when I got here, I had to learn to play rhythm guitar. That's the short answer.
Well, I just think back to like, with Wrecking Crew days and stuff, even seeing like when it transitioned from, Tommy and, Glenn Campbell and Barney Kessel and all these guys to like Louis Shelton, and then seeing like Larry learn from Louis Shelton and, seeing guys, then of course a million guys learn from Larry, and seeing Luke learn from Larry and Lee Ritenour, and then seeing Landau be right behind Luke and their friends and learning from him. And then I remember like my first few sessions not knowing at all what to play, and then being somewhere with Mike and being like, holy shit, that's how you do it. Like look at the way he just came up with that part on the fly. It's fascinating to me how that works. Yeah.
Beyond fascinating. To me, it was magic,
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to get pretty good at it. By the time I worked with Jeff Porcaro, that was a decade. See, I got here in 1980, and when I started doing sessions with Jeff, it was the early 90s, and I had a fair amount of skill at that point and a lot of heart and drive. And the reason I got to know him is because we would both get there early. I got to the studio early for every session because I was just frightened, and I wanted my gear to work, and I wanted to make sure everything was just so, and I wanted to relax and practice. So for like an 11 a.m. session, I'd get there at 9 a.m. and make sure all my gear was perfect.
Yeah.
He would get there early because he was driving in from Hidden Hills, and I think he didn't want he just wanted to relax. And so we would actually I would end up in rooms with him where it was just he and I alone in the studio. And we would actually even kind of jam sometimes. It was awesome.
That's awesome. Man. So do you remember a moment where you had reached like a level of self-sustainment just from sessions and realizing it like I can do this now, just only this?
Yeah, the start of it was after Rick Springfield. I kind of went broke, and I did publishing demos for songwriters for 2 years. That's where I learned the skills. That was the school of hard knocks. Sometimes 3 a day. I would drive around town and do demos for songwriters, and to have songwriters arguing over your parts. Yeah. It was brutal, but very necessary. So after that 2 years, my skills were in like 1989. My skills were good. I did a Crowded House record that got me a lot of credibility, and then I auditioned for Mr. Mister, and they didn't choose me. I almost got that gig, but they decided not to choose me. Right after that, I got this in this band called Toy Matinee with Patrick Leonard, and that actually, I'm doing a film about that right now, a video. That actually was such a credible thing for me. It gave me confidence, and it was right after that. So I'm going to say 1990. I had enough confidence and enough skill to actually do it full time, and I was full on. Now, at that point, I still didn't have the skill level of somebody like Michael Thompson, who was really busy then, but I had enough. I couldn't read as good as the other guys. I wasn't quite as versatile as the other guys, but to tell you the truth, I always tried harder than anybody to please the people I was working with. I would stay late. I would show up early. I would offer them 10 different parts, 10 different options. I always just bent over backwards for everybody.
Right.
So that's how I worked my way in. So it was 1990. It was on full time.
Nice. Well, you talking a little bit about your process there. I remember the first time I came over to your place, and you kind of just this was a long time ago, but you walked me through, like, when you pull up a song and, the different parts you give everybody. Like, maybe if it's just they send you a track and they don't give you explicit detail or whatever, you kind of have a thing you do that you give to people. And you go above and beyond. You're always giving them a lot of options. And a lot of that, of course, comes from knowing what works and having done it for a long time and developed your process. But I do always feel like you treat it very seriously. Like, you have to do the best you can do, which was really, I admire that. Like, it always seems like you want to make sure you do the best job and give people exactly what they need, but also with some options, and it's not all the guys treat it that way. And not that it's, the right way or the wrong way, but I always admired the way that you seem to treat every project on the same playing field.
I remember that moment when I played you that track, because I was frankly embarrassed, because I realized, and this happens when you have another person in the room and you play them a piece of music, it can change your perception of that music.
Sure.
Immediately. You think it's one thing, and the minute somebody else is in the room with you, it turns into something else. Well, I realized at that moment, Josh is actually discovering that I'm not really even playing guitar. And and at the time I was embarrassed, but it really is the job, because it's orchestration, it's arrangement, and it's sound. Oh, yeah. That's all it is. And generally, I took a simple part and made it simpler every hour of my life. Yeah. And so you're basically layering and orchestrating all these sounds and parts to make a song blossom and make the composer, songwriter, artist's dream come true. And at a certain point, it's not guitar anymore. It's just sound. And it's usually the simplest version of the best part, or the best version of the simplest part, as Trevor Horn used to say. So I remember that moment. I was embarrassed about it then, but now I'm kind of proud of it, because it's really true. It's you actually got it. You understood. But for me, it was like, oh my God, Josh is hearing me play nothing right now.
No, but that's not the way I felt about it at all. You know what I mean? Yeah. I felt like I was seeing how you hear a track and the experience that you've built up over the years to know, right. Okay, I don't have to play, it's not, okay, maybe one time, one take is all you need and it's a single guitar part, it's a vibe. But you've learned, when a track comes on, right away to kind of feel what this needs, and you build it, and it's a job. And yes, there's inspiration involved, of course. You get inspiration, you get an idea, it's improvisation, but it's also like you're building a house and you have a job to do. And I always liked that approach. Like I said, I felt like you treated every project with the right amount of respect. Like, you didn't just go, well, this one, they're only paying me this much, I'm only going to give them one track. Or this one, they're paying me this much, I'm going to give them the whole dog and pony show. It was all the same to you, which I really appreciated seeing that.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, that's how I did it, and that's why I was able to keep working. And it's also seduction too, and you know this. If you're working for an artist, you're trying to seduce them. I mean, it really, you do everything you can to so that they, next time the thing is, you don't want them to think of a guitar player next time. You want them to think of you next time.
Yes. Yeah. Well, what's been interesting for me in my evolution here in LA from not being a session guy to being a session guy and a sideman to now pretty much only doing my own stuff or producing records and still sometimes some sessions through mail. The sessions that I get now are almost 100% not just hiring me to play guitar, on their thing. They're hiring me to be me. And it's, they don't want a ton of parts. They don't want this and that. I'm not doing the job anymore. I'm just playing Josh Smith over the top, which is super rewarding, but also it means I get way less phone calls.
I would say it's better, though, because I've reached the point now where I'm not the guy that you're describing now. At this point,
Sure.
I've become more the guy. I want to be like you now. I want to be like, okay, this is what I do. Here it is. And part of that is because, the web thing for me is very, I started it 12 years ago, and that it's become just incredibly rewarding. And so when I do a session, it's almost family and friends at this point, because the other thing has gotten so rewarding. I mean, I do this little performance in every YouTube video that I work really hard on. And so I get to it's like my solo album. YouTube is like my solo album. So I'm more like you now. And believe me, I don't think you're missing anything. You stayed an artist. If you're an artist, then you have to sacrifice a lot of other stuff to be an artist, and it's worth it. So you're in the good spot.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it is to be an artist, or to just kind of, when you make a decision to be something, whether it's a full-time session guy or an artist or a touring guy, you're always sacrificing some other lanes. You know what I mean? It's incredibly hard to do it all. But being an artist, especially because you're making sacrifices financially a lot of times, in deference to what feeds your soul and what you think is the right thing to do. That's an interesting, because I still get calls, not so much for giant sessions anymore, but definitely I still get calls for sideman tours that I turn down, and
yeah, you don't have time for that. Yeah. Josh, you will never have time for that again in your life. I predict you will not have to, unless it's the Grateful Dead or whatever, you know what I'm saying, or whatever, it's just, and people don't realize the severity of that because it's so hard. You can't be two places at once. And you and I have both had this experience where two things are happening at the same time on the calendar, and you can only do one. There's a lot of loss involved in what we do also, because you really have to say no. And you think about it, it's like being an actor. You get offered two huge movies, you can only do one. The other one is the biggest movie in the world, and the one you chose is okay. It's just like that. Yeah. It's like being an actor.
Yeah. Yeah, you're 100% right. I'm curious, do you remember, and I know probably people have asked you all the time, what's the best session you ever did or the most exciting? I'm curious, what was the biggest train wreck session ever? Do you remember? Does one stand out? Because I have one.
Sure.
I'm curious what yours is.
Sure. I've got a lot of them, but the worst one was with Richard Perry on a Randy Travis Christmas song. There used to be these records that were huge called A Very Special Christmas, and they would come out every year.
I remember with the red cover with the square.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like every Christmas record, they're all done in the hottest months of summer, right? You know that. You've done them. And so I used to do a lot of those records. And so this was at Ocean Way with Richard Perry producing. It was Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley, right? And it was a great band. Oh my, I think it was Lee Sklar and Jim Cox and Lenny Castro and Rick Schlosser on drums, and it was a big band. It was amazing. And Richard, I felt a lot of pressure because I actually had to do a sound alike of the actual part. That's really what they wanted. And he came out into the room and yelled at me and said, "We need to do it in a different key. Can you do it more like the record?" More, and it was like he was all over me in front of everybody. And Randy Travis was there singing, and he basically, I hate to say this, but he humiliated me in front of all my heroes with the way he was yelling at me and asking me. And I got it finally. I was having trouble changing keys, which shouldn't have been the case because all you got to do is move your hand up the neck. But I was so rattled by his abusive, he was famous for being abusive to people. And I remember we got through the session. Oh, I remember. I was at a certain point, I was going, okay, I'm going to walk out of here. And then I looked at everybody around the room and I said to myself, that will not help these guys. If I walk out of this session, it's not going to help these guys get through this. So I didn't walk. I mean, I was ready to walk after him yelling at me in front of everybody. I remember at the end of the session, I was out in the lounge, and you know that lounge. Randy Travis walked out, and he looked at me and said, "Hey, man, great job. How you feeling?" He knew. I mean, he knew. He saw what was going on.
Sure.
And then every time, it was like a couple of times after that, I'd get a call from the office of Richard Perry to do a session. It was only like twice, I think, and I would just laugh, no, and say no. It was
Unreal.
on that day. I'm sorry to stretch this, but that was a morning session. Okay, check this out. This is what's so great. That was a morning session. One of the worst sessions I'd ever done. I went and had lunch with my wife and Nigel, my stepson, and then I went to Cherokee and did my first session with Trevor Horn on a Rod Stewart record. And it was one of the greatest sessions, and it led to an entire Rod Stewart record and 15 years of great sessions with Trevor Horn. So you see, you're a bulldog, and you get beat, and then you stand back up again, and you go back in, and something great happens. It was one day. It was like,
That's amazing.
yeah.
Well, I mean, and so that's something I can never relate to, the 2-session thing. Never did I have any of that, like going from one session to another, or 3 sessions in a day, like Larry and Steve Gadd and these guys talk about. Like I couldn't even imagine what that was like at that time.
Can I tell you one more story that just popped in my head?
Yeah.
I'll be really quick.
Yeah.
I had one day like that. I had a friend who, I went to Rick Springfield's house, and he had an actor friend there, because I've stayed friends with Rick. And I was telling him, this actor was from Canada, and I was telling him about my week, and I said, it was the day before, and I said to this actor, I said, yesterday, I did a Home Depot commercial, then I went and did the original CSI, and then I went and did a Jamie Foxx session for Babyface on his new record. And this actor, he looked at me like, what? I mean, I did a big commercial, a big TV show, and then a big record in one day. Now, for an actor, there's a lot more money associated to those things. You see,
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So for him, he was thinking, wow. Yeah. For you and I, Josh, it's, they're great, but you don't get paid what an actor would get paid for those kind of things. But that was another, that's how it was. I mean, at its peak. Anyway.
Yeah. I can't imagine that. Like, I've been reading Greg Matheson make some great posts on Facebook, reliving certain days and things about his career. And so many of his days were like, well, this day started here, and I did this jingle, and then I went and arranged, orchestra for this session, and then I produced this artist, and I finished the night at the Baked Potato. And I was like, it's like, wow, 4 things in one day, Yeah. Just crazy. Yeah. Oh, man. Well, I'm curious, now that you're where you are and you've ended up doing, an unbelievable job with your educational stuff and your club and the YouTube, and you've pivoted slightly and having this whole new, really it is like a new profession, a new career, which is super cool. Obviously you didn't think you were going to end up here, but looking back on, all the sessions and the touring, did it go at all the way you thought up until now? Like when you were leaving Albuquerque, was it, I'm just going to make a living as a guitar player by any means necessary? Or did you think, like you were going to join Matinee or something and be in a band forever?
Well, I did a solo record around 1990.
Oh, yeah, I have it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I'm still proud of it. It's actually, it holds up pretty well at this point. I went out and did a couple of gigs, and I felt like I was hearing too much guitar. It was like, so here I am in the verse, here I am in the bridge, here I am in the chorus, here I am in the outro. And then we move to the next song. Oh, here I am in the intro, here I am in the verse, here I am in the chorus. You're laughing. Yeah, so that's something that I'm sure you found a way to work through that and keep it interesting, because your job as an entertainer and a performer is to make that equation happen. I realized I didn't think I could ever pull that off. And so at that moment, I thought, okay, my best bet is to do this session thing because it seems to be going well. And in a way, you can be a little lazier if you're just, well, it's easier to just be given a job than to have to create your own job. So as an artist, you have to create something out of nothing. It's a blank sheet of paper. But if you're a session musician, you answer a phone call and then you just do the best you can. It was I knew that it was right for me. I knew it was right for me. So I made peace with it. It was practical. It was doable. I was doing okay at it. I've always been able to do what's practical. And the beginning of the web business was 12 years ago. So I started this thing 12 years ago because I saw myself, the business had changed. I was 50 years old and I was going, how do I want this to play out? And that's why I started the web thing.
Yeah, wow. That's good foresight 12 years ago. You know what I mean? To jump
It's
on.
fear. It was fear. Fear and foresight and being practical and trying to be, not kid myself. And, times change, you change. There's a clock that's ticking. I'd been, 3 decades of studio work and I was still doing lots of sessions, but I knew that at a certain point it would change even more. And it did, and it has. And you know that.
Yeah. Wow. Do you, this is a silly question, but do you miss ever touring? Do you ever miss touring?
In theory, I miss touring because there are moments that are high points like you've never experienced. You wake up in Switzerland and there's a waterfall that you didn't see because you got there so late that night, I mean, it's incredible. But there's also all those moments of just waiting. And I miss the idea of it. And certainly when you do it for somebody who's really well funded, it can be amazing. Like the fourth Rick Springfield tour, we had our own private plane. And it was, we didn't want to come home. I mean, it was like, you do that. And so I'm glad I experienced that stuff, but it really, at this point, your time is more valuable than anything. And when you tour, Josh, all of that, that hard work and all of that travel is in service of the most important thing there is, which is you and your brand and your artistry and your audience and your playing and your songs. So it's worth it if you're an artist. It's worth it if you're in the Foo Fighters and everybody's an equal partner. But as a side musician, at a certain point, you have to decide what your time is worth. And pretty much most side musicians, if you want to transition into something else, you just can't give up all that time. You can't give it up. So in theory, I love the idea of being in a nice hotel in Switzerland or waking up one time I woke up, we parked the bus in the middle of a high level stock car race. I literally woke up, walked out of the bus, and there were like stock cars whizzing around us. And I was going, this is my dream.
That's crazy. Yeah. Man. Well, dude, it's an insane career, man. It's so inspiring having watched you go through the arc that you have. And you have such a legacy. I mean, that's a great thing about the session thing is you have such a wealth of, recorded history of your career to see your growth as a musician and all your contributions to music. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. You ever think about that?
Well, I just, it was tenacity and just hanging out and waiting, just waiting for the phone calls and taking the phone calls, taking every session that led to a better session, treating every employer like they were family. And it adds up.
Yeah.
It adds up.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. Let's jump into 10 questions.
Great.
All right, Tim. Number 1. When you started learning and playing guitar, do you remember the very first thing that you got under your fingers correctly that just lit the spark, set the hook, I can't believe I figured this out?
House of the Rising Sun. Eric Burdon and the Animals.
That's a good one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I can imagine listening to that 100 times because it was probably on the radio every 30 minutes, when it was current, and figuring it out. I mean, that feeling must just be like I've found a magic trick. Because I know that feeling.
Yeah, A minor goes to C. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
D goes to F. Oh, that's really hard, but oh, I'm doing it. Oh, yeah.
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 Yeah, that's unreal. Yeah, I remember, learning the BB King slow blues intro, but more importantly, like after I finally learned the pentatonic scale, and the first time I was able to find the key of a song I'd never heard before on the radio and just start playing along with it, like soloing, that was like, yeah, it felt like I was a wizard now, Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no going back after that, right? You're hooked. Like, that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Obsessed.
Obsessed, exactly. Do you remember the first solo you ever learned note for note, or was that something you didn't do?
No, I had a great guitar teacher for exactly 2 years, once a week. And it probably was something like Crossroads by Clapton, And believe me, I didn't learn the solo. I learned bits of it.
Uh-huh.
But I think Clapton, even more than Hendrix, Clapton was more accessible. I loved B.B. King, but Clapton from Cream, some of his licks were the first things that I learned.
Interesting. You're not the first person I've heard say, Hendrix was my favorite, but Clapton was more accessible as a guitar player. I can see that, especially probably back at the time when it was fresh, like where Clapton, if you'd listen to B.B. King, you can relate. And Hendrix probably felt like you were listening to an alien when it first came out, and you'd never heard anything like that before.
Yeah, it was spooky and rubbery, and I do remember learning Purple Haze, and it was still like I can't quite play it like this. This is so I can play these notes, but it just doesn't sound like him. Woo.
What was it like? I'm curious the first time you heard Hendrix, because my dad has a vivid story. And again, my dad's not a musician, but he just loved music. And he has an enormous vinyl collection. He's just a musician, a muso, who listens 20 hours a day. And he says he remembers being in the car, and he was big at the time into Clapton and the Beatles and Cream, when he heard Purple Haze for the first time on the radio. And he said he pulled over the car. He was so freaked out because he'd never heard anything like it. And it changed his life. He's an enormous Hendrix fan. And again, he doesn't play. Well, do you remember the first time you heard it?
I do remember an early experience of listening. It was like it turned my world into basically an acid trip. I mean, I literally, if I was sitting in the backyard and Purple Haze was coming out of a little AM radio, I could... everything, the colors were more vivid, and the sky was full of the clouds were like spaceships that could take me places. I hate to say stuff like this, but it really was like, this is a window into a world beyond my comprehension, and imagine into the other world, whatever the other world is, the other it was like another dimension.
Well, I mean, I remember me, my first time hearing it. And, so you're talking about, I probably heard it, in the middle of the 80s, by the time I knew what I was listening to. So let's say 86 or something like that, 87. I'm a 7-year-old boy. I'm way removed from it, 20 plus years, almost. And I'm wondering, it killed me then. I can't, that's what I'm saying. I can't imagine when all you've heard is the Beatles or Cream, and the stuff preceding it, Motown and stuff, to have that come out, it must have just been such a culture shock to the world, I would think. Yeah.
Well, and I have to actually add this. So I'm basically, 9 or 10 years old when this thing comes out. It's 1967, I think.
Right, 67.
This is also the time when you're looking at girls going, oh my God, I am just over. It's like, I don't even know how to handle this energy. So it all kind of gets rolled up into the, it was like, you're feeling stuff for the first time in your life. That was part of it, I have to say, I remember. Woo!
Yeah, wow. All right. Number 3, what's the first thing you play when you pick up a guitar? Your hands go somewhere on autopilot? Is there like an automatic thing that just happens?
Yeah, I mean, it might be something like, oh. Or, I kind of check tuning, so I might do an arpeggio. Oh, so there you go. Yeah, so I either play an arpeggio to check the tuning, or I'll play. God, this is so fun, Josh. I'll play. I'll go. Clapton Blues.
Exactly. Yeah. What about? Do you remember? The first time you would hit standby at a sound check or something. I had something I played almost every time, so much so that guys would parrot it back to me. So I had to stop doing it. What did you used to do to like check you? I'm sure something like that. Arpeggio, check your tuning, check the full spectrum of tone. From bassy to treble.
No, it probably was never something real specific. Maybe like, God, that sounds so 80s. Or so you do that, and you're checking the sound of the amp. It's pretty, it's just like.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, it's not a specific thing. Or if I'll tell you this, if there was somebody in the room that maybe I wanted to show them that I could really play, I'd go. And then just kind of nonchalantly go, yeah, no, that's nothing.
Only guitar players can relate to what you just said right there. Nobody else does. Drummers maybe do that a little bit. You know what I mean? But there's not often a lot of drummers out. Guitar players are the only ones that are always pissing and marking their territory the second they flip the standby on the amp. Yeah. I remember, this is like 10 years ago maybe, I was on tour with Raphael Saadiq, and we were in Austin, Texas, and Gary Clark Jr. had just gotten signed and was getting big as like this new blues thing, right? And he was opening for us with Raphael, and so I remember we got there to sound check, and I hit standby on the amp, and I was just playing, but Raphael came up to me and he's like, oh, yeah, like you don't know that the hot new blues guy who just got signed is standing right there and you're not showing him your shit right now. And I was like, I didn't even think about that, Like, yeah, whatever.
I forgive you. I mean, that's who you are, though. That's and you got to do that. If you're faced with the choice of concealing that, or you got to do that. It would be wrong to not do that. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. All right, number 4. What key, style, song, groove do you have like that just arrives in your head often? Is there something that comes a lot when you're cooking breakfast or, when you're not listening to music, or is it always different? Because for me, I have a recurring theme. I've got a shuffle that just lives there, normally in B flat, and I'm always blowing over the top of it. I'm always hearing and a lot of times I have to finish the thought before I can move on and continue to function. Anything like that for you that just always lives in there?
Yeah, I've discovered that really my greatest love right now is writing these pieces of music that are basically, what I'm trying to do is recreate I always fell in love with the outros of these songs that I heard on the radio, and all through the 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s. So you'd hear the outro and all this amazing stuff happen. And that's where the hypnotic part of the song was always the outro. So when I write for my YouTube channel, I create these jam tracks and I write these pieces of music. It's very easy in one way, because I'm not trying to write a hit song. I'm not trying to figure out the most amazing chorus everybody's ever heard. I'm just trying to create an outro that sounds like a dream. So I gravitate towards, and honestly, I realized the other day that C sharp minor and E are one of my, C sharp minor, and my hand fits perfectly. Okay, so and then I'm playing in C sharp minor, and then all of a sudden I'm in E. And then with C sharp minor, you get all these cool.
Yeah, always.
And then my hand is just perfect. And if I bump any strings by accident, they are sympathetic. They're not, they work with the keys. So I love to do a combination of kind of chordal rhythm soloing. So it might be. So double stops, chordal things, open strings. Stuff like that.
Okay, as a B-side to that question, I'm sure because of the amount of sessions you've done probably putting some thought into recognizing what's the first thing you hear when a track comes on that you never heard, because you do it all the time. You load up a track and then you realize what you're going to play. So are you capable of, when a track comes on, hearing it in a way that your first thought isn't, what would I play on top of this?
Yes, I am, because I've been in enough situations with people where they don't, and this goes back to what we talked about before, they don't want a guitar player's ego necessarily. They want a sound that just lights up the song. So that might be one note. Mm-hmm. So I might go, oh, this would be so great if I went. But then I look at the person and I go, maybe they actually are more interested in like what Coldplay is doing, and I need to go. I mean, that's not the greatest example, but maybe it is. I mean, there is a moment, and I'm sure you go through this too, where you weigh maybe 2 or 3 options, and your favorite option, you check it. You go, is that just me wanting to kind of show my stuff, or is it better for me right now to kind of disappear behind everything else and just kind of make everything else sound better? And it's probably like being on a basketball team and, having an assist, passing to the guy who does the layup.
Yeah. I've found myself trying to, even during this pandemic a lot, I've been trying to listen to a lot of music, normally about once a day, try to find something I've never heard before. And just on Spotify, I'll just play a record I'd never heard before and give it a shot. And again, during that exercise, I've been kind of not just trying to find new music to like, but then I've been trying to pay attention to what's the first thing that I do. Am I hearing myself over the top of this, or am I focusing in on groove or melody, or am I harmonizing with the melody? Like, or do I just start blowing in my mind over the top? And it's interesting because, like, part of me thinks like a session guy, so I start to hear, this part would add to this tune, this was what I would play, and then the other part of me starts to analyze the tune rhythmically or melodically or whatever, and then the biggest part of me just wants to solo over the top of this song all the time. So I've been trying to notice why certain things make me think of one or the other first when I listen to a piece of music. I don't know why yet.
That's a great exercise, and for you, the soloing is important, because I would think for you, when you hear somebody else's artistry, you would want to take a piece of that and add it to your own artistry, which is your songs and your productions and your playing and your soloing.
That is the way I've noticed. That is the main thing I'm listening for, is inspiration, but inspiration to take back into my world. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So sometimes it's the way that I can tell that they've mic'd the guitar or something, or sometimes it's a part, like I wouldn't have thought of that part, but it could be anything. But yeah, normally it's to bring it back into my world. You're right. Yeah, absolutely. Cool, man. All right, number 5, and this will be an interesting question because I kind of feel like I know your voice, but I'm curious how you feel about it. Was there a moment when you felt like you started to find your voice on the instrument? And did you make conscious decisions to like take that turn, like I'm going to go further this way because this is me and it doesn't sound like anybody else. This felt like something that's mine. I'm going to go further that way.
Yeah, I mean, there were certain things. When I did my first solo record, I had to do that. I literally spent 2 years of my spare time finishing it, and I got a small record deal, luckily. What a miracle that was. And it got put out. And it was things like, okay, in my soloing, there are 3 main elements. There is pentatonic blues, single string melodies, which I call nursery rhyme melodies. Okay. That simple. And arpeggios and chord shapes. So what happens is I'll do this sweet melodic phrase that's really simple, and then I'll go, uh-oh, I got to get tough now. And then I'll play pentatonic blues. And then I'll go, oh, there's a chord shape, and that'll create another melody. You know, I can trace a minor 9 chord, boo-doo-doo-da, and that'll create another melody that's across strings. So the single note melody might be on one string, which is some of my favorite playing. One string playing, because of the timbre, it all sounds the same, and you're generally sliding. It just rules, to use your word. And then, but if I do something like that, it's so sweet and simple, I'm almost embarrassed, and I got to play tough blues right after that. And I'm talking about in the course of a 2-bar space.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly trying to freshen things up by being sweet, sour, tough, sensitive, whatever I can do, the opposite of what I just did. And then I would realize, I can tell you full on that if I pick up a Strat, I'm soloing on the neck pickup, because that's Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan. I don't need anything else. I don't need to use, for soloing on a Strat, it's the neck pickup. So you discover things that are yours that you don't need to change for the rest of your life. And that's I stand behind that stuff. And it's usually little stuff. The other thing is, I realized I don't need the most distorted tone. I'm like you in that way, where you want a tone where it's pick sensitive. You pick softly, it's clean. You pick hard, it's distorted. So that's your tone. Once you find that with the particular rig you're using, you don't need to look any further. So yes. There are things that define you.
Do you feel like when you're improvising a solo like you just described, do those transitions, do you think them, or is it completely instinctual as it happens? You're not thinking it at all.
I don't think about it at all.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Unless I'm talking about it and I go, oh, this is, and as a teacher, which I'm learning to teach on the job too. There's so many great teachers that we all know. You included. You're a great teacher. As a teacher, you learn to talk about stuff. Well, I probably 5 years ago I couldn't have explained it this way, but that's what it is. You break things down to their elements. You can talk about them, and no, I don't think about it at all. And that's the beauty of what this is.
You just feel when you're playing a melody, maybe a single string one. You feel that moment where ba da 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 ba 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 da ba da da ba, where the blues has to happen in that moment right after it. Yeah.
You got it. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Amazing. All right, cool. Okay, this I'm very curious about, because I think you're one of the most well-rounded guys I know. So, what do you consider your biggest weakness on guitar?
Oh my. I've tried, it's my fingers. I mean, I want more than anything to be able to Travis pick and finger pick and do this. And certainly I'm better at it now, but I'd like to be 100 times better without a pick.
Wow.
And, it's just something that's eluded me my whole career. And then I always end up picking up a pick and getting it done with a pick, and hybrid picking, anything. I mean, you've just reminded me that I need to practice fingers.
Wow.
That's it.
I'm really, you know what? As much as I hybrid pick everything, and I'm good at it, I'm terrible without the pick in my hand. I need it there. And I use my fingers plenty, but when I don't have the pick and it's just the fingers, not so good. And definitely finger style on acoustic is my 100% biggest weakness, like such a struggle. Yeah.
Oh, we share that then. We share that. Yeah.
All right, number 7. Who's a huge influence on your guitar playing that people would be surprised to hear?
I would say someone like Stephen Stills and Neil Young.
Okay,
because Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, the record Deja Vu. I mean, that guitar playing, this just kind of really simple, soulful, great tones. I mean, a lot of that stuff, and a lot of the way songwriters would approach their guitar parts in the 80s,
Sure.
Like a band like Pablo Cruz in the 80s. I cringe even mentioning them. They had amazing guitar solos. As much as we used to laugh at the band Styx, those guitar solos, Bachman Turner Overdrive, those guitar solos. So you go back to the late 70s and all of the bands that were just kicking ass out there.
Yeah.
I mean, even Gary Richrath from REO Speedwagon.
Sure.
So
yeah.
you go to all these guys, but here's one that you'll really respect. Probably the guy that is the most in my DNA as a guitar player was Johnny Winter.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that you probably didn't expect that, and I realized it about a year ago. I did some work with Edgar Winter here at this house
Right.
before the pandemic, and I realized, there was a record called Johnny Winter and that was live that I listened
yes.
to. I probably listened to that about 800 times,
Yeah.
and it's Johnny Winter.
That's cool, man. See, I mean, I love Johnny Winter, and he is kind of in that category of, well, everybody knows Johnny Winter, everybody's listened, but he never comes up a lot of times when guys are going through their top 3, top 5, But
Yeah,
we've all listened. I mean, I listened to Johnny Winter a million times. A million times.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah. All right. Number 8. In a gig situation, would you rather have a great guitar and a shitty amp, or vice versa? A great amp and not a good guitar?
They're both fatal. I have to have a guitar that I can actually play. But if you're talking survival on a gig, you're not going to hear the shitty amp over the cymbals and the drums. And if it's a loud shitty amp, then I'd rather have a better guitar. But if it's a shitty amp that's underpowered, then I'll take the shitty guitar and a better amp. The amp, you have to have a loud enough amp to play quietly on your rhythm parts and then be able to sail over the whole band during your lead parts.
Yeah.
So the amp at least has to be powerful enough to do that, and that means getting louder than the drummer. But a shitty guitar, I have so much trouble live. I will play, live. My guitar needs to play like butter live, because I don't want to fight the thing. I don't mind fighting a guitar in the studio because that's character. It creates something.
Right.
But live, I don't want to be fighting the instrument. So I didn't really answer, but I sort of answered.
You answered both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird. I've done so many fly dates in my life, like, thousands at this point. And it's always led me to the realization that, all these fly dates, I have my guitar and I have my pedals sometimes, but if I get stuck playing into like a Marshall, 2000s, with digital reverb into a closed back cabinet or something like that, I'm going to have a horrible gig. Now, horrible gig is relative. Like, I'll still pull the gig off, and the audience may not know the difference. But to me, I'm going to hate every second of this gig. As opposed to, if I just even get a twin reverb, that the reverb works and it functions and it's loud enough, I could pull that gig off and have a better time, even if I was forced to play some other guitar, than vice versa. And I don't know, that's always been that way.
That totally makes sense to me, because if your people should, once in their lifetime, everybody who is a fan of yours should be able to put one of your guitars in their hands and realize the cables, the steel cables that are actually on your guitar. You have the strongest hands in the world, so that totally makes sense to me. And it's very, it's something we can all learn from.
Yeah, I can muscle a guitar to work, any guitar.
Totally.
Kind of.
Totally.
But if I have, some amp that just doesn't do it, I know it's a worse night for me. Yeah, for sure. All right. Number 9. What keeps you motivated to continue to put in the work and to grow as a player? Because, I hear it. I hear you working on new stuff. You post videos all the time on YouTube, so I can hear, over the last 5 years, things that are different. Like, I never heard Tim play that before. What keeps you growing at this point? Because it's something that I obsess about. As now I'm 41, and as I grow, also we've all seen guys who we grew up with who were the local heroes who at some point stopped growing. And that was an obsession for me. Like, oh man, he sounds the same as he did 20 years ago. There's nothing new coming out. Do you worry about that? What keeps you motivated?
Well, it's a lot of things. It's several things. But the first thing that keeps me motivated is you. And your, because I don't need to be Josh Smith, but maybe I need something that you're doing and I can grab something you're doing and incorporate something you're doing. And this is a great lesson for anybody who's following you, or any guitar player, is that you can take a piece of somebody and make it yours very quickly and very efficiently. And you keep adding those pieces and it changes you and shapes you. So it's you and your buddies, and this guitar is at this amazing level right now, and you're part of this group of people that keep pushing the envelope. I realized a long time ago, I don't have to be the first guy in line. I can be the guy who gets the pedal 6 months later. I can be the guy that learns the lick 6 months later. In some ways, it's sneaky and it's smart that way, because I can let you do the work. You can be the tip of the spear, and I can go, hey, I'm going to take that sweet little thing that he did, and I'm going to, make it part of my vocabulary. So it's all of you, right? It's also this recognition at my age that I've been doing this now for 50 years. I've been doing sessions as a professional in LA for 40 years. And I still have not mastered this thing in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. So it's probably like any pro golfer or anybody who does. There's kind of a zen to it where you realize, oh, I'm just scratching the surface.
Yep. It never ends.
It never ends.
Let me just ask you, do you ever worry about maintenance? Like keeping what you've got? As you get older, I worry about it, because that was another thing about guys who I really respected as a kid who would sometimes start to go down the hill. And I'm realizing now some of those guys I saw start to go the other way were only like the age I am now when they started to lose some facility,
Well, you actually mentioned that to me a couple of years ago, and I sent you a video I had just done that wasn't even that great, but I was actually playing as fast as I could, and playing faster than as fast as I've ever played.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a problem until you maybe get into your 70s. So my young friend, you have a lot of time. Guitar players in their 60s are still pretty ferocious. Yeah. I'm not talking about myself, I mean, and this will give you an example. I had a long conversation 2 nights ago after listening to 3 songs that are new by Alan Hines. Okay. Mm-hmm. Alan, I believe, is a couple of years older than me. Oh. And okay. It's getting better. That thing he has is getting better. Yeah. So, my friend, do not worry.
All right, fair enough. It is, because it's a weird thought, It's like I always, from afar, saw Les Paul, and it was like, well, I want to be like that. I want to play until I can't play anymore and play well, Because I did see guys who, maybe it was just their work ethic, though. Maybe they just stopped putting in the amount of effort necessary to maintain. But it made an impression on me.
And it also, I want you to forgive these people, because there are people who just say to themselves, I already did that.
Yeah.
And we know, you and I have a hero who I'm not going to mention, but we saw him recently, and he's in that spot where he's more of like, I already did that. And it's okay,
You're right. Everybody has their own level of contentment with what's going on, and you got to respect that without question. Yeah. All right. Number 10. Do you have a 5-year plan? Are you a guy who makes goals and needs to achieve them? Or is it always just reaction for you and going with the flow? I tend to work better with some sort of goals. I don't normally put time on them, but I like to at least have them. Things that I would like to achieve. How about you?
I didn't really have to do that because I got so busy doing sessions that everything I did was a reaction, and it was a job that I treasured and a job very few people get to do. So I knew I just had to actually do it as the best I could for as long as I could. But like I said, at age 50, when I heard about these guitar teachers who had big businesses, I thought, okay, how do I want to transition? How do I want the next chapter of my life to be? Because this session thing is going to change. It's already changing. So it was more a life plan than a 5-year plan. I made a conscious decision. I did a double shift for 10 years, for an entire decade. I couldn't do it now. From 50 to 60, doing the session thing almost full time, and doing the web business in all my spare time every weekend. I didn't take a vacation for 12 years.
Right.
So I was able to build this new business. So I did two life plans. One life plan was to do the practical job of being a session player. And then my second life plan was to create a teaching business, change my life in this chapter. What I didn't expect was for that teaching business to actually give me the chance to be an artist for the first time. So I get to be an artist on YouTube and do exactly what I want and have thousands of people see it. And you know, you're feeling the same thing. As hard as it is to do YouTube, you play something and 10,000 people see it or 100,000 people see it. You go, wait a second, that's an audience I just performed for. So that's part of my artistry. So that's been the greatest gift about this. So it's been two life plans. And I've been able, when I choose a life plan, I just put my head down and persevere. And so, yeah, it's not 5-year plans. It's basically two life plans.
Nice, man. Well, I just saying you're an incredible inspiration to me because I see you put in the work. You make a decision, you do something, and you work it, you do it as best you can. And that's always been the way that I've tried to approach everything that I do. And it's been very inspiring to see your career and always just, you know, you're always just such a helpful guy. I mean, you're always there when I have a question, and it's greatly appreciated, man. You're truly an inspiration. And dude, thank you for taking the time out of your day to do this.
Thank you. It was actually kind of electrifying and fun. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I think people
Great.
will enjoy the conversation. For the rulers, we're gonna do turn 2 in a second. But if you are not a ruler, you should become one, or at least please subscribe to the channel because it will keep me motivated to continue creating content. But there will be links to all things Tim Pierce in the body here. So please go sign up for Tim's educational stuff, subscribe to Tim's YouTube channel, buy Tim's solo record, you know, all the things you can do to support Tim and his great music and artistry. Dude, thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome. Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Rulers, we'll be right back.